Princess Anne finally breaks silence on why Prince Philip didn't live with the Queen. When people across Britain and the world think of the enduring legacy of the British monarchy, they often recall a deeply ingrained image: Queen Elizabeth II, calm and regal, standing side by side with Prince Philip, a stoic gentleman who quietly supported her. They were not just a symbol of the monarchy, but of a love that seemed eternal, spanning over 7 decades. To the public, they were the perfect model, a marriage that transcended time, weathering the storms and changes of history. Yet, there is a lesser-known truth. In his final years, Prince Philip left Buckingham Palace, choosing to live apart from the Queen. This decision puzzled many and even sparked doubts. Why would he, the man who always stood behind the Queen in support, opt for a quiet retreat? Could there be cracks beneath their steadfast façade, cracks that had never been revealed? And then, recently, in a rare moment of breaking her silence, Princess Anne, their only daughter, spoke out. What seemed like a small revelation sent shockwaves through the media, not only because it was confirmed by King Charles III and Prince Andrew, but also because it unveiled hidden truths never before disclosed. These truths could fundamentally change how we view the royal marriage once thought to be ideal. So what was the real reason Prince Philip abandoned the palace? What does this decision reveal about his relationship with the Queen? And more crucially, does it signal a deeper fracture, a sign that the monarchy itself might be as fragile as any other institution? Join us as we explore a story of love, sacrifice, and the dark twists hidden behind the most fortified walls in Britain. A story that could shake the image of the royal family as we know it. A love story born of fate. Before they were the Queen and her consort, before the world knew of a reign spanning over 7 decades, Elizabeth and Philip were just two young people caught in the web of a destined foreign love. It all began in 1934 at a royal wedding in the United Kingdom. Elizabeth, then just 8 years old, a shy girl with an innocent face and gentle gaze, met Philip, a sharp-witted, energetic 13-year-old with a hint of defiance. In that fleeting moment, no one could have predicted that these two names would forge one of the most profound and enduring love stories in European royal history. The pivotal encounter came in 1939, when Elizabeth visited the Britannia Royal Naval College with her parents. She was 13, and Philip, now 18, was a cadet preparing to set sail. At a lunch that day, under the curious gazes of royalty and officers, Philip stood out with his lively demeanor, humorous conversation, and unapologetic playfulness. Elizabeth watched quietly, captivated. After the visit, she began writing to Philip, letters filled with heartfelt thoughts, discreet but brimming with the emotions of youth. In her private room at Buckingham Palace, she kept a photo of Philip by her bedside. To Elizabeth, he was not just a charming young man, but a quiet admiration, a longing that transcended the rigid constraints of royal life. When World War II broke out, Philip joined the Royal Navy, serving on battlefronts from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Despite being thousands of miles apart, their connection never faltered. Love letters continued to flow. In Elizabeth's every word was maturity, resolve, and suppressed longing. Throughout the war, she made one thing clear: Philip was the only one she could ever love. By 1946, with the war over and Philip back in Britain, their feelings had ripened. At the Balmoral estate in Scotland, amid its wild and tranquil landscape, Philip proposed. Elizabeth didn't hesitate for a moment. However, the decision was not easily accepted. King George VI worried his daughter was too young. He wanted Elizabeth to live her youth before taking on the responsibilities of royalty and marriage. Moreover, Philip, despite his noble lineage from the Greek and Danish royal families, was seen by some courtiers as not British enough, rough, and even criticized as arrogant and unreliable. But Elizabeth stood firm. Her love needed no approval. It needed only endurance and trust. After some deliberation, King George VI consented, on the condition that Philip renounce his foreign titles, convert to the Church of England, and adopt a new surname, Mountbatten. Philip agreed, though he admitted that abandoning his identity was deeply painful. For Elizabeth, he was willing to make the sacrifice. On November 20th, 1947, their wedding took place at Westminster Abbey in an atmosphere of post-war hope. The nation celebrated, the radio broadcast live, and people lined the streets to witness the momentous event. But behind the lace gown and cheers were silent sacrifices. Philip became the Duke of Edinburgh, but lost his former royal titles, his religion, and the surname he was born with. He stepped into a new life under the shadow of the woman destined to become queen. In the early years after the wedding, the young couple lived in Malta, where Philip continued his naval service. It was a rare time when Elizabeth could live as an ordinary woman, free from protocol and guards. She went to the market, cooked, and waited for her husband to return from duty. Small, simple acts that made them like any other couple. She once said those years in Malta were the happiest of her life. Princess Anne, their daughter, later shared in an emotional interview. I grew up in a family where my parents' love was the cornerstone. It wasn't loud or ostentatious, but it was so strong that nothing could shake it. Without that love, the British monarchy might not have retained its shape today. But every love has its price, and the first storms were bound to arrive. No matter how solid the foundation, living in a gilded cage full of expectations and rules was enough to wear down even the truest of feelings. A life in the Queen's shadow. When Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1952, the United Kingdom held its breath. The sudden death of King George VI then thrust a 25-year-old woman onto the throne in a post-war era still rife with instability and the gradual dissolution of the British Empire. But for one other person, this event was not just a historical milestone. It was a quiet turning point, marking the end of a free life and the beginning of a long journey of silent sacrifice. That person was Philip, Elizabeth's husband, just 30 years old, once a promising naval officer with big dreams. Elizabeth's coronation turned him into a follower. Not a king, not a co-ruler, but a prince consort. Though the title sounded noble, it was an ambiguous role with no political power, no direct influence over royal affairs, and most crucially, no voice in most major decisions. This forced Philip to abandon the naval career he cherished. He once confided to a close friend, "I felt like I was stripped of myself." Over a decade of service on warships, earning promotions step by step, vanished overnight. His life shifted to an entirely new rhythm. Public tours standing behind the Queen, ceremonial events devoid of soul, and thousands of handshakes no one truly remembered. However, what hurt Philip most deeply was not his career, but something seemingly trivial: the family name. After Elizabeth's ascension, a debate erupted within the royal family about the naming of the royal house. Philip wanted his children to bear the surname Mountbatten, a noble name tied to his family's tradition and honor. But Queen Mary, King George VI's mother, along with then Prime Minister Winston Churchill, insisted on retaining Windsor as a symbol of the continuity of the British monarchy. They argued that adopting Mountbatten would make the monarchy seem Germanized again, an unacceptable notion after World War II. Philip was furious. He once said bitterly, "I'm the only man in this country not allowed to pass my name to my children." The seemingly simple statement carried all the frustration and pain of a man living within an ancient institution where real power eluded him, despite sleeping beside the Queen each night. It wasn't until 1960 that Elizabeth made a small but deeply humane concession to the husband she loved. She declared that their descendants, those without royal titles, could use the hyphenated surname Mountbatten Windsor. It was a minor, almost symbolic victory, but for Philip, it was recognition, not just of a name, but of his existence in British royal history. Princess Anne, their only daughter, later shared in an interview that she vividly remembered evenings when her father sat quietly in his study, his gaze distant, occasionally revealing a sadness he couldn't hide. "He never complained," Anne said, "but I knew he struggled greatly to hold himself together, to remain utterly loyal to my mother, while a sense of aimlessness surrounded him." Anne recounted a time when Philip confided, "No one taught me how to be the husband of a queen." That statement encapsulated the contradiction of the role he bore, both the pillar of the family and the shadow of a wife too grand, in a world that hadn't carved out a place for men like him. And in that silence, Philip forged his own legacy, not through power, but through duty, loyalty, and above all, the acceptance of walking behind, to keep Elizabeth's reign moving forward. A quiet revolution in the palace. If we only see Philip as the Queen's shadow, we miss a complex man of immense contributions, a man who quietly drove a soft revolution within the British monarchy. Without a crown or throne, Philip chose a different path to exert influence: modernization. He was the first to propose broadcasting Elizabeth's 1953 coronation live, an unprecedented move opposed by many courtiers who saw it as diminishing the monarchy's sanctity. But Philip understood that without opening the palace gates to the outside world, the monarchy would remain a distant relic. The televised coronation, watched across Britain and the globe, transformed how people viewed the monarchy. For the first time, they felt invited to participate. Philip didn't stop there. He persuaded the royal family to appear in television interviews and allowed cameras to capture daily life in the palace through the 1969 documentary Royal Family, once considered absolutely taboo. He also ended outdated traditions like the debutante presentation at court, replacing them with friendly garden parties where the middle class could meet royalty in a more open setting. Beyond royal duties, Philip pursued personal passions, and he wasn't afraid to turn them into reality. He wrote 9 books on topics ranging from the environment and technology to philosophy. He pioneered the Queen's annual Christmas speech being televised rather than just broadcast on radio. In a digitizing era, he was the first to introduce computers to royal offices, a revolutionary step at the time. He even managed royal estates with a focus on sustainability, from organic farming to overseeing finances to minimize waste. Under Philip's hand, the monarchy's outdated symbols became vibrant and relevant like never before. But no matter his successes, his private life couldn't escape turmoil. The contrast between Philip's and Elizabeth's personalities sometimes led to tensions they couldn't hide. While Elizabeth was calm and traditional, Philip was adventurous, outspoken, and unafraid of confrontation. Once he drove so fast that Elizabeth gasped, only to be scolded by her. In anger, he retorted, "If you open your mouth again, I'll leave you on the roadside." The story later became a lighthearted anecdote, but it revealed the stark differences between two people bound by duty. From there, rumors of Philip's extramarital adventures surfaced. From alleged relationships with a famous actress to a Russian ballerina, the media never spared him. Yet none of these rumors were ever substantiated. The palace firmly denied them, and those close to him remained silent. Most notably, Princess Anne, his daughter, staunchly supported her father. In a rare interview, she said, "My father was the most loyal man I've ever known. He lived for my mother and for this country." Anne, like her father, was straightforward, resilient, and unpretentious. This made her one of Philip's few confidants in his later years. She understood the loneliness he endured, especially as he felt increasingly constrained by ceremony, protocol, and the walls separating him from the outside world. Anne was not just a daughter, but a spiritual companion, listening when Philip felt suffocated by the role he carried. Philip once said, "I wasn't born to walk behind, but I learned to do it because I love her." That statement perhaps sums up his essence best. A modern man in an ancient institution, constantly bending reality to balance his personal identity with a greater mission, steadfastly protecting the throne for the wife he chose to stand by for life. The quiet retreat to Wood Farm. In May 2017, a brief announcement from Buckingham Palace sparked speculation and mixed emotions. Prince Philip, at 95, was officially retiring from royal duties. It wasn't a grand abdication or a ceremonial farewell, just a simple statement that he would no longer appear at public events. And so, after over 7 decades bound to protocol, ritual, and the media's scrutiny, Philip quietly stepped back. His final official event took place that August, at a Royal Marines parade where he had once served and where his love with Elizabeth first bloomed. The image of the elderly prince with silver hair and a slightly stooped back, but still walking with resolute dignity, left a lasting mark on the public. They understood that a long chapter in royal history was closing. After the announcement, Philip didn't choose to rest in a grand castle or lavish residence. He left Buckingham Palace, the center of power throughout his public life, to move to a smaller, more secluded place, Wood Farm within the Sandringham estate. The modest house, once home to Prince John, the epileptic youngest son of King George V, held special significance. With no large retinue of guards or elaborate protocols, Wood Farm became the haven of peace Philip had long yearned for. Speculation began to spread. Was this a sign of a fractured marriage with the Why wasn't he by the Queen's side in his final years? Why choose such a quiet retreat when he had been a steadfast pillar of the monarchy for over half a century? The answer didn't come from the palace, but from Princess Anne, their only daughter and the person closest to Philip in his final years. In a conversation published after his death, Anne broke her silence and revealed a deeply moving truth. His decision to live apart was not a sign of distance or coldness in their marriage. On the contrary, it was the result of a love strong enough to grant each other space to breathe. Anne said, "My father was always independent. He spent his life under the glare of an institution he didn't truly choose, but remained loyal to. At some point, he wanted to be himself, not the Queen's husband, not the prince, just Philip. At Wood Farm, he could wake up without donning formal attire. He could brew tea, read history books for hours uninterrupted, paint, fix furniture, or drive a horse-drawn carriage through the fields. Hobbies he had set aside for decades due to a relentless schedule. Most importantly, he did so with Elizabeth's full consent. The Queen, with all her power, didn't stop her husband. She not only supported him, but found ways to stay connected in their own way. Daily phone calls, handwritten letters, and unannounced visits. They were physically apart but never spiritually distant. Anne recounted that many within the royal circle were initially shocked. To them, this was something that yet shouldn't happen. In their world, personal choices bowed to protocol. But Anne understood. He didn't leave because he was tired of or resented my mother. He left because he needed to be himself before it was too late. Anne's revelations not only clarified her father's controversial decision, but also exposed a deeply human side of the royal family, where love isn't always about constant presence, but sometimes about allowing the other to be free. A love that doesn't cling or bind with titles or duties, but is rooted in profound understanding and respect. In retrospect, Philip was not just a devoted husband, but a man who dared to step outside the mold to seek truth in his life, a truth sometimes found only in silence and solitude. And that, perhaps, was his final affirmation of the role he chose, not a shadow but a quiet light behind the throne. A simple life in his final years after stepping away from the royal spotlight, Prince Philip didn't vanish. He chose to live as an ordinary man, a gentleman who loved nature, was passionate about history, and was no longer bound by ancient rituals or rules. At Wood Farm, the small house tucked away amid the fields of the Sandringham estate, Philip lived his final years in peace. He painted, read, and particularly enjoyed carriage driving, a pastime tied to his youth and later passed on to Princess Anne. Despite his age, he retained his vigor until a car accident in 2019. At 97, Philip was driving near Sandringham when he collided with another vehicle. Though no one was killed, the incident stirred media and public attention. Shortly after, he voluntarily surrendered his driver's license, a decision seen as driven by respect for public safety rather than political pressure. But even away from the limelight, his bond with the Queen never cooled. They called each other daily, an unspoken ritual. When apart, Elizabeth often sent handwritten letters or small items from Windsor to Wood Farm to remind him she was still there. In return, Philip attended significant events, such as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's 2018 wedding, despite his visibly declining health. He sat quietly, spoke little, but his presence was a silent affirmation of his enduring commitment to family and monarchy. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic erupted. The royal family, accustomed to palaces open to the public, now faced unprecedented seclusion. In this extraordinary context, Elizabeth and Philip reunited. They moved to Windsor Castle to isolate together. The royal household dubbed this arrangement HMS Bubble, as if they were on a ship cut off from the outside world, reliving the early days of their wartime love. A longtime servant recalled, "It was a rare time without schedules, protocols, or reporters. They dined together, talked, and walked in the garden like any elderly couple. It was a fleeting moment when they could be themselves. No crown, no duties, just the companionship of two lifelong partners who had walked together for over 7 decades. But time spares no one. In 2021, Philip was hospitalized for an infection, then transferred to a specialist hospital for heart surgery. Princess Anne, who visited frequently, later shared that her father had accepted his mortality. He made it clear he didn't want a 100th birthday celebration. No fanfare, no fireworks. just peace. A nurse who cared for him revealed, he still read, still spoke wittily, but it seemed he was ready. He didn't fear death. He just wanted it to come gently, without troubling anyone. In her memorial speech for her father, Princess Anne said something haunting. My father chose to live authentically, and he chose to leave that way. No need for accolades, no need for applause. But his presence and loyalty, especially to my mother, will always be remembered. In his final years, Philip did what he rarely could in life, live on his terms. No longer the consort always stepping behind a powerful figure, he returned to being himself, a simple, stubborn, intelligent man who refused to bow to convention. And in that peaceful separation, he showed the world a seeming paradox. Physical distance can sometimes sustain a spiritual bond stronger than any ritual. A monarchy at a crossroads. When Prince Philip passed away in 2021, he left not only a void beside the Queen, but a profound question about the future of the British monarchy. For over 70 years, he had quietly modernized the royal family, guiding it through the post-war era, the age of television, and now the social media era. But as Elizabeth's reign ended and King Charles III ascended the throne, the question looms, can the British monarchy adapt to the 21st century without losing itself? Recently, rumors have surfaced. There's talk that King Charles is considering a decision that could shake the monarchy's traditional foundations, bypassing his son, Prince William, to name Princess Anne as his successor. If this happens, it would be a fatal blow to the principle of male line succession, upheld for centuries. It would not just be a personal shift, but a political statement, a pivot away from feudal legacy toward a merit-based monarchy. And if we consider Princess Anne's credentials, the choice isn't baseless. Throughout her life, she has embodied duty, performing more royal engagements than any family member, sometimes even surpassing her father in certain years. Anne maintains a calm, discreet, but effective presence. No scandals, no glamour. To the public, she seeks no fame, only service. Her straightforwardness, decisiveness, and tireless work ethic have earned her the nickname, the soldier without stars. But this raises a larger question. Can the monarchy survive by altering its hereditary structure? By prioritizing ability over bloodline? Or would it be a double-edged sword, sparking backlash from traditionalists who see tradition as the monarchy's lifeblood? Some royal commentators have likened the potential transfer of power to Princess Anne as a final act of Prince Philip, though he is gone. After all, he was the first to challenge the palace's conservative principles. From bringing cameras into the palace in 1969 for the royal family documentary to fighting for the Mountbatten name for future generations, he battled for innovation while staying loyal. Anne, inheriting his resilience, iron will, and pragmatism, now stands as a living symbol of those values. If she were to lead a new reign, even as a regent or short-term successor, it would be more than a historic moment. It would be a final affirmation of Philip's legacy. A monarchy that wants to survive must evolve. But would the public accept such a change? William, with his image as a devoted father and ideal husband, has become a symbol of a new royal generation. Ignoring him for Anne, even temporarily, could spark discontent, not just among the public, but within the royal family itself. Can modernization go so far as to touch the hereditary structure without toppling the mystique and symbolism at its core? Perhaps the answer lies in what Philip once said, you cannot survive if you don't change. But if you change too much, you lose yourself. A modern monarchy, potentially led by the most diligent woman in the royal family, Philip's daughter, is possible. But it will require courage, not just from King Charles, but from an institution that has stood for over 1,000 years. The future remains unclear. But if one thing is certain, it is this. Prince Philip's legacy lies not in titles, but in the small cracks he made in the wall of the tradition, cracks that paved the way for the light of a new era. Conclusion, a legacy of love and sacrifice. In the end, looking back at Prince Philip's long journey, his 2017 decision to live apart stands out as a deeply personal act. After a lifetime of sacrifice for the royal family, after decades as a husband, father, and steadfast supporter of Queen Elizabeth II, Philip finally found peace for himself. Life at Wood Farm, with hobbies like painting, carriage driving, and reading, was a reward for the sacrifices he had set aside throughout his life. Anne, his loyal daughter, revealed that Philip sought peace, not to escape the monarchy or his family, but to live simply, free from the pressures of being a prince, when he no longer had to bear the duties of a consort. The enduring love between Elizabeth and Philip remained the foundation. And though they were no longer as close physically, their bond stayed intact, a testament to the power of sacrifice and loyalty. Philip's legacy is not just in his bold decisions to modernize a monarchy that has weathered countless upheavals, but in his belief in change, a belief he and Anne both knew would not be easy. If one day the British monarchy can reshape its traditional structure, it will be a testament to the legacy Philip left behind, a more flexible monarchy driven by service to the public, not just personal glory. So what does Philip's choice say about the monarchy's future? Can the change hinted at by both him and Anne usher in a new era, a modern monarchy that retains its traditional values? This is an open question, not just for the royal family, but for all of us. Through all they endured, we see that the story of love, loyalty, and sacrifice in the royal family will continue to shape the future of the British monarchy. It's not just about the grandeur of palaces, but about the challenges, tough decisions, and quiet sacrifices. Subscribe to stay updated on captivating royal stories and join the discussion about Princess Anne's potential. Explore with us the shadows, secrets, and inspiring moments of royal life.